Thank you, Michelangelo. So welcome everyone. My name is Krzysztof Daniel, but people who don't speak Slavic languages usually call me Chris because that is much easier. I work for the Leading Edge Forum, which is a think tank division of DXC, one of the companies that provide IT solutions for other corporations. I work as a researcher and advisor. I'm a researcher in the first place, advisor in the second, but sometimes those roles change. I do research which is supposed to help our customers to operate better in this uncertain world. And quite recently, I've started wondering whether my life is running in the direction I want. And it turned out that plenty of research that I've done for corporations applies to individuals and vice versa. It works both ways. I will head into this presentation, but before I do that, there are two important disclaimers that I need to make. First one is that this is an exploratory, unstructured, and very new session. It probably is very far from the standard you've used to observe during webinars, right? You are the first audience, maybe. You are actually the first audience that I'm sharing this content with. I can imagine that for some of you it will be uninteresting, but if you will try, I hope you will be able to relate to it, and maybe it will become useful to it. I'm happy to take questions all the time, so if something is interesting to you, please speak right. I will try to answer whatever issues you will raise. The second disclaimer is that this is not an official advice how to operate in your life or how to run your organization. As you can see, the presentations is branded with my employer branding, right? But I'm not in a position to represent my employer, and therefore all opinions are my own. Said that, the plan for today, I will be basically scratching my own itch. I'm obsessed with strategy, and I've been obsessed with strategy since my childhood, mostly because I was very terrible at all sorts of sports. So I played chess, I played Go, then Counter-Strike, then I got into project management, team management, and quite recently into company management. And then my entire journey made a full circle, and I'm looking at myself and trying to figure out whether I can have better life, whether I can help my team or our customers to operate better. The plan for today is to go through Wardley mapping, then to discuss uncertainty, then to go into the Canivin framework, then to discuss uncertainty again. Uncertainty links very much to risk, which links into opportunities. Then we will introduce Taleb thinking and what Taleb thinks about previous frameworks. And at the end, we will try to combine all three big frameworks into one cohesive framework, which allows you, or should allow you in theory, to find out where are opportunities for you personally and for your organization or team, right? Because those are two different ways and they work slightly different. Before we get into the content, I would like to run a small poll and basically check how many of you are familiar with Wardley mapping, Canivin, and Taleb's work. Can you see the poll? Publish. Yep. Can you see the poll?
Yeah, the poll is going through.
Awesome. Okay. Okay. So I can see that you are more or less familiar with conniving, so I will not spend a lot of time there. Some of you are familiar with Wardley mapping, so I will try to explain it a little bit. Actually, I will start with Wardley mapping, and I cannot see anyone being familiar with Taleb's work. That will be interesting, and the presentation may be actually a little bit shocking to you. But that's good. Okay. I will end the poll now, and let's proceed to Wordley mapping. Wordley mapping is a framework for building situational awareness. Situational awareness is a skill or a state which basically says that you understand the environment around you, you know how does it behave, and you can anticipate what's going to happen in the future. If you are most of the time right, then you have high situational awareness. If you are surprised quite often by the world, then you probably have low situational awareness. If you have high situational awareness, you usually achieve what you want and you know what you can achieve. Low situational awareness is sometimes called wishful thinking. Wordley mapping is a graphical framework, and it basically makes people reveal their assumptions and mental models and allows them to discuss them. That's all. It's a communication framework. Over the next 2 or 3 slides, I will try explain how Wordley mapping works. That may be difficult, but please stay with me. It may be worth it. So the core concept of Wordley mapping is evolution. The evolution says that every component in your world, be it activity, computers, cars, bits of knowledge, some processes, start as something as experimental, as a genesis, right? It's something new that is being done for the first time. Actually, if you look at the history, it's full of firsts, and you never know which first is the real first. It's experimental, and because it's experimental, it's highly unpredictable. There is no business in it. There is no market because this is something completely new. And the future may reveal some value, but doesn't have to. We don't have businesses which operate in this experimental phase, which we call genesis. But because people are curious and greedy at the same time, they constantly look at experimentation and try to find use cases for the knowledge that they have found. Which basically means that they try to put the knowledge into the business work and earn some money. So this is the place where you also have experimental solutions that have to be built for you, because you can't go to a shop and buy a solution because it's not there. It doesn't exist, right? You have to pay somebody to build it for you. Of course, there is a lot of risk involved, and it's a very good solution or approach if there is a big market niche and the solution is a source of potential competitive advantage. But if there is a custom-built solution and few market players uses it, there is this greed causes people to investigate the space and wrap custom-built solution into products. If you think about computers, first generations, ENIAC, MANIAC, and other computers were built almost as individual entities. But then in 50s, I think, they were replaced by products. So you went to a shop and you actually could buy a computer. It was expensive, but you could buy it. And this product phase means that a lot of uncertainty is gone. If you go to a shop, you know what you can buy, you know what's available, and the predictability is being increased. Many people uses it, so the knowledge about how to use this given thing spreads across the market. This is also the place when there is feature by feature competition. Currently, cars, for example, are in the product space because you go to a shop, you buy a car, you own it. But the next phase is commodity utility, where the market is full and saturated. Everyone uses given solution like electricity. It's very predictable and branding doesn't matter. Cars are transitioning to that commodity utility phase because you see all those initiatives, car as a service, you think about autonomous taxis. This is the transition from product to commodity. Computers went through similar transition from product to commodity, and this is where servers were replaced with cloud. The same worked for electricity, and I trust for a number of different solutions out there in the market. So, because this is all based on human curiosity and greed, which are basic market forces, we can anticipate what will happen in the future. If, for example, we know that there was a mission to the moon, Apollo program, many years ago, we know that sooner or later we will have commercial space travel, custom-built Apollo missions, and product, or maybe in the future commodity, space travel. We don't know when it will happen, but if you are a field expert, if you would work with those space travel or rocket construction, you could more or less say how far you are from the breakthrough. But the full value of evolution axis can be revealed if you look at case studies. I will show you one which is very often shown in this context, and this is a case of an insurance company who faced a following problem. They were deploying 8,000 servers per year. The cost of a single deployment was this one. This was the cost of a labor, and this was the average failure cost, which constituted almost 10% of the server cost, which was a lot. And they've spent about 6 months trying to reduce the error rate. So this is the situation, and this is the same situation presented on a Wardley map. So we have people who want to install 8,000 units per year. In order to do that, they need to order servers, and ordering servers is very standard. Everyone does it in the same way, so it's in a commodity utility space. Then the server needs to arrive, and you need to receive it, which is the goods in procedure. But then people said that people who were responsible for the project said that they have custom-built racks, and they need to mount those servers on the custom-built racks. But standard servers don't fit custom-built racks, so they need to modify them. And this is the source, or this was the source, of the failure costs. Now, design thinking and automation says to basically optimize the process that is failing. In this case, they wanted to build an automated line that would customize their servers. But the question that was asked after they saw this diagram was, why do you use custom-built racks. What's interesting about that? And it turned out that it made sense many years ago, but it's no longer a valid solution. Nobody could rationalize why they are using custom-built racks. So the proper transition or the proper solution of the problem was to basically migrate to standard racks, which removed or simplified the mount process. Now, as you can see, the challenge in this space wasn't to solve a problem. It was to find a right problem to solve. Now, people aren't daft, right? Because it sounds, I mean, it's almost funny when I show this example, but people aren't daft. People are quite smart, but because of the bounded rationality, we can't see everything. And some of the knowledge doesn't exist even in the organization. People who made the decision to use custom-built racks probably changed their positions. So you have a working solution and you don't know why. Without an honest discussion, it's very hard to figure out what's current state and what can you do. So this is more or less how do you use Wardley mapping. You create a diagram and you play the what will happen if components move to a different phase, what will happen if you swap and replace some components with other components, what will happen if competition will create an open source diagram. It's just all about communication. Now, how do you do strategy in such place? Well, as I have said, if you have a product, you know that you have to launch a better product. And this is the operating mode of many corporations. You have a product and you need to launch a better one. But then you have to launch an even better one. And this is the place when you are on the border between product and commodity, where so-called industrialization happens. So you replace a very expensive product with a cheaper, good enough version. This is the difference between servers in your server room and cloud. In the beginning, cloud wasn't as good, as known, and as predictable as servers in your server room. Using autonomous taxis will not be as reliable as owning your own car. But overall, in the long run, it will be probably cheaper. And because this is all driven by market forces, you know that once you standardize a component, say cloud, cars, I don't know what else, but if you standardize it, if you make it ubiquitous, you lower the cost of experimentation. Because if you want to experiment, if you like to experiment with cars, right now you have to buy a car and experiment with it. Maybe if you want to test whether you can operate your own transport company. But if you will be able to rent cars for minutes, then you can conduct many more experiments, which means that new components will form that use existing new components will form which use existing component, but they will be highly uncertain. Those will be experiments. And over time, they will slowly move to the right space. All right? And this means that our situation is constantly changing all the time because we are either making even better products, we are improving our components internally. There are big disruptions, and those big disruptions are when characteristics change. So this is all about this transition and about experimentation here. We can imagine today what will happen in the future if we will be able to print sensors, like every kettle, every every bottle of water will have its own sensor, and we will be able to track it. But it will happen only when sensors reach this commodity utility space. New systems will emerge that will use those sensors, but we don't know what those sensors will do. I hope this is more or less clear. What's interesting is that while we can anticipate that this is the overall process, it doesn't mean that it happens in one company. Actually, if you look at the market of, for example, search engine, you can see that before Google, we got about 17 different initiatives. There is 79 search engines over the period of the past more or less 20 years. And a lot of them is unsuccessful. This is the cost of experimentation. Wardley map can tell you where is the future, what should you anticipate, what should you expect from the future, but it will not tell you whether your initiative will be successful. Right? So you know where the future is. You can probably figure out what should you do to get there, but you have no idea whether your approach will work. So that's all. If this subject is interesting, there is a lot of materials in the internet about Wardley mapping. We can run a separate session about it. Now, I would like to move to conniving. In the poll, you have almost plenty of you said that you are familiar with conniving, so I will go very fast through it. Conniving is a decision-making framework, and it relies on the assumption that every domain belongs to one of the four zones. We have chaotic, where nobody knows what's happening, and in such an environment, it's very difficult to make any decision based on facts and knowledge. So you have to act first, see what are the results, and then figure out what should you do next. We have the obvious domain, where everything is simple, and you can actually use best practices to deal with changes. But there is a little bit of changes. There is not a lot of changes because things here are very structured. And then we have complex and complicated domains. The complicated domain is a domain of experts, and you can figure out what should you do based on knowledge, while in the complex space you have to experiment a little bit more to figure out what should be proper place. Now, in business, the primary cycle is this. You switch between experimentation and the complex space, and then when the results of your experiment create a cohesive story, create a story that makes sense, you go to the complicated, and based on everything you have learned, you try to figure out what should you next. Sometimes you move into the obvious space, which means that you can enter all the planning. Now, conniving said, in the conniving space, Dave Snowden, the author, very often emphasizes that if you want to become creative, you need to enter the chaotic zones. One of the best lectures I have seen mentioned that all those loops are about the coffee and alcohol intakes. There is the complex space and the small dive into the chaotic one, when you have to think freely and experiment, right? You cannot look at constraints. You just have to figure out what may work. And then there is the complicated zone where when you go back into the complicated space, where you actually want to put the knowledge you have gained into the business work. Now, how can you create a strategy and how can you harvest opportunities using Canivin framework? And this is pretty complicated for me because what Canivin framework advocates is that in the complex space, there is a small number of people who understand what the future may bring. So, but you have to reach those people before they talk to anyone else. And this is perhaps the biggest contrast between Wordley mapping and between Canivin. Because in Wordley mapping, you build a shared situational awareness. Everyone has the same knowledge. Everyone expects the same from the world. In Canivin, you go and talk to people and gather their viewpoints, then you analyze them and you find dominating point of view and secondary points of view, which may or may not indicate where are future opportunities. The key point is that if those people talk to other people, those secondary viewpoints will be gone because we all like to be on the same page. But there is one more important point. Dave Snowden said that they've analyzed successful and unsuccessful companies, and the primary factor that determined the success of a company wasn't how it was managed. It was that the company was founded near the chaotic zone after a very shocking transition in the market. So, for example, the invention of computers caused a number of different computer companies to rise to existing levels. This is actually called the apex predator, and it means that if we have a company which emerges from the chaotic zones, the company learns how to grow in this space, becomes even more optimized because, when uncertainty is removed, when you know what works and what doesn't, you can remove plenty of waste from your organization, and it works until there is a new transition happening, new chaotic situation in the market where the past giant cannot adapt because over the past years it had cut all the adaptation features. So the disruptor enters the space and finally it becomes a new apex predator. The point of this is that if you are the apex predator, you will succeed despite, not thanks to, but despite everything you do. You don't have to be competent. It's enough to avoid serious mistakes. So with that, it basically means that you are either in the right place, you are the apex predator, you try to build your success around the apex predator, or it doesn't matter what you do. There's a bit of, I'm saying it with a bit of tongue in cheek, because it does matter for you, for what you do for many people. But from this success point of view, from this being really big and important and visible, it doesn't matter what you do unless you are an apex predator. The question is actually, do you look around yourself and do you look for places where apex predators can emerge? Do you schedule time to look at your immediate environment and figure out whether there is any chaotic situation where there are disruptions and where new forms actually form. New forms emerge, new forms of business. And look how consistent this is with Wardley mapping. In Wardley mapping, the biggest transition is between product and commodity utility. This is the biggest transition because the market is already formed. You introduce much more efficient version of the solution, so everyone adopts it very fast in 8 to 10 years. It's explosive change, as it happened with clouds, as it happened with cars in 100 years ago, etc., etc. Right? And it can be anticipated. We know that after such a transition, new layer of companies will form that use that industrialized component. New apex predators will emerge over time. Right? So from the Wardley and Caniving perspective, it's almost all about where you are right now, what's your immediate environment, and what's happening there. Any other actions, using certain tools, having certain attitude, thinking about user research methods, marketing stuff, it's all only incremental improvements, but they don't change your situation. The question I face almost all the time is how to put myself in a situation of an apex predator. I think I have some answer at the end of this presentation, but let's get there slowly. So I've covered Wardley mapping, I've covered Caniving, and I would like to proceed to Taleb. Taleb is an author of, I think, 3 books, Fooled by Randomness, Black Swan, and Anti-Fragility. And Taleb basically says, well, actually, I've bought this comic strip to explain what Taleb says. Taleb says that you are all wrong. And by all wrong, he says, by all, he means all the scientists and advisors, and including Dave Snowden, author of the Caniving, and Simon Wardley, author of the Wardley mapping. And why is Taleb so angry? Well, that's a bad word. I can't actually say why he is angry, but here is his merit point that he's making. I'm sure you have seen this chart. This is initial jobless claims in the United States. And as you can see, it goes more or less in a very predictable zone over a large number of years, until 2012. And what Taleb is claiming is that you can't predict the future. There are events that you can't anticipate that change everything. And those events are either risks or opportunities. It doesn't matter what you do in this quiet period of time, because your earnings, your benefits, or your losses most of the time will form almost insignificant flat line. Only in the times of the shock, it really does matter what is your situation and how are you prepared to handle the shock. Now, if you think about those shocks, we have seen plenty of unpredictable situations in the past couple of years. I don't have to mention the coronavirus, but we faced Brexit. In 2011, there was giant tsunami in Japan. I don't have to mention certain political choices that were made and were quite surprising. I can imagine those events happen all the time. With that, I would like to enter the risk space, because with this approach, when there are unpredictable events, Wardley doesn't make sense and conniving doesn't make sense, because those events wipe everything. All your strategy, all your planning is gone. And Taleb proposes a different approach. Taleb says, so not Taleb says, traditional approach to the risk is that if you have driving variable that creates some risks, which are losses, not gains, but losses, you can do two things. First of all, you can estimate the probability of the risk, calculate the potential impact, and you know what's the expected value of the risk. And you can do two things. You can either try to make the impact lower, or you can lower the risk. So if you think about earthquakes, you can either buy insurance to minimize your impact, or you can reduce chances of the earthquake, which means that you have to move to a geologically stable place. This is how I think all the approaches to risk work. What's the problem with this approach? First of all, you can't estimate the probability of an earthquake. And second of all, the risk isn't linear. What does it mean that it isn't linear? Well, it means that if you think about the earthquake, small earthquake will damage a few buildings, but a large earthquake will damage a lot of buildings, and it will put a strain on all the suppliers and all the building renovation crews. Costs of restoring your property will rise shortly after the earthquake, so the insurance you bought in the first place before the earthquake will not cover it. Does it make sense? I hope it does. So this is the situation where trying to protect yourself doesn't really make sense. And the problem is that it's like with the tsunami in 2011. Some people say it happens every 600 years. Tsunami that destroys a lot of Japanese coast. So it happened in 15th century, probably. What are the odds that it will happen again next year? You can think about it, but the answer is you don't know. You can't calculate it. And for many people, it means that they can build their homes and houses on the Japanese shore, which can be covered by the tsunami wave. Because they may be lucky and it will not happen during their lifespan. Now, this is risk, and this is pretty, let's say, serious and rather unpleasant topic. But the same method and the same approach works for positive gains. Positive things are also not linear. They are rather like this. And this is a specific form of let's say, an opportunity, which is called option. Option means that you have a very limited cost and very high potential benefits. Now, of course, options are also financial instruments, but think about reading a book. How much does it cost to read a book? Couple of dollars. How much can you gain? You can change your life. Of course, not every book changes your life, but every book costs a little bit. But overall, it may be some positive gain. The question for me is, what other options do we face in our lives? What options do we face in our business settings, in our teams? This is the reason why I'm covering this area during this presentation, despite I know it puts me at a professional risk. But this concept of finding options and discussing it with you, maybe after the presentation or maybe later if you are interested, is actually very important, not only to me, but I trust for every single one of you. Now, options work even if you don't know the probability. If you try to estimate the value of a single book, you can't say that 5% of books is great. Therefore, reading 20 books means you will find at least one that's really important for you. You can do that. You can't estimate the probability of the success. But because the cost is low, you can experiment with many books. And this also means that you should handle risks in your life and in your professional environment in this way. It's a barbell. First of all, you have low risk and low returns. This is a stable source of your income that pays your bills for both your personal case and for your business. And then you engage in plenty of options where you know that there is high risk, there may be high returns, but this is highly uncertain, and you don't have any initiatives in between. Why? Because in the middle, there should be medium risk and medium returns. The problem is that there is no such thing as a medium risk, and you can't tell that the risk is medium for almost anything because of those unpredictable things. Right? And you couldn't. Not so long ago, I was running a session for one particular customer, and we completely missed the risk of coronavirus. Right? For many people, it was unpredictable. Right? We did proper risk assessment, but nobody thought about coronavirus. This is the reason why there is an empty space. It doesn't make sense to engage into speculation, and in the middle there is speculation. So the strategy, according to Taleb, is to find your source of income and experiment with many things. We'll get back to the experimentation. I want to show you something. An example of how can you apply Canivin, Wardley mapping, and Taleb to a very small and simple problem. Imagine that we make a bet. We flip a coin 5 times, and if I win, if I get 5 heads, you will buy me a cup of tea. And I won. What's the chance of this event? How do you solve it with Canivin? Well, you look, you take a coin. I mean, it's rather simple task. So it's simple, sense, categorize, respond. You saw 5 heads, categorize its probability, respond, which means you have to calculate. The odds are about 3%. How do you solve it with Wardley maps? You draw a diagram. I will not draw it here. You need to observe the input. You need some probability knowledge. You need a calculator on if you can calculate it in the head. Then you put it together and you get 3% too. Why there is no Taleb on this diagram? Because Taleb doesn't care. For Taleb, getting 5 heads in a row is so unpredictable or so unexpected that he will question the fairness of the coin. And this is perhaps the biggest weakness of Canivin and Wardley mapping. If you flip a coin, you assume that the coin was fair. Now, if you flip the coin 100 or 1,000 of times, you will probably understand that it isn't fair. But how many chances do you get in business to check whether the situation is what it appears to be? Exactly one. Which means that if you make a mistake in the Canivin and you classify the problem as a simple while it is in disorder or chaotic phase because it looks like that, you are making a critical mistake to your business. I'm not even discussing Wordley map in this case, because Wordley map will show you what you need, or you will draw what you need to solve a problem, but it's very useful in optimizing and learning how to calculate the probability faster, but it will not make you question the fairness of the coin. And Taleb, out of those three, is the only person that will raise that point. Putting it all together, so we've learned a little bit about Wordley mapping, we've learned a little bit about Canivin, we've learned the philosophy that Taleb represents. How can you look for opportunities in a corporate world from an employee perspective? And this is the place where I'm extremely sorry, but I don't have any answer here. If you work for a corporation and you don't have an experimentation budget, and experimentation budgets are highly incompatible with accounting, governance, and reporting, you don't have other choice than to ignore Taleb and focus on being more and more efficient, even if you are being more and more efficient at the wrong thing. That appeared earlier in the Canivin. It's the place you are in is more important than your skills. Actually, if you look at the history of various companies, I haven't found any single public company that were capable of transitioning from one domain to other. Unless there is a strong ownership who can dictate what the company should do, companies tend to act in a very predictable way that optimizes existing value chain. And it does make sense because from the investor's point of view, it doesn't make sense to innovate within the organization because investors experiment on other level, experiments by startups that experiment. Investors don't need innovation in the corporation, and corporations are pretty inefficient with experimentation, so investors know that they have to rather sell old company, invest into the new one, than to look for opportunities for the old company if it costs too much. So if you are an employee, what you can do actually, because it doesn't mean you can't do anything, there is something you can do. You can create your value chain, and this is another value chain. It's a value chain for a company that does buildings inspection using drones. So if you work for such a company, you know that things which are on the left-hand side, that are highly experimental and uncertain, can create future value. So your best choice is to actually try to get there. I mean, it would be my best choice to get to those teams, because future businesses may depend on those things that don't exist yet. On the other hand, those major components which are here, if you will get work there, those things will not change, and probably your domain-specific knowledge will outgrow your generally usable skills. You will become a prisoner to the company. Said that, you may convince your board or your boss to play a simple experiment. What if particular components will be removed? And it happens all the time. Military restrictions around GPSs, sanctions around computing, customers disappearing for whatever reason, being locked down because of closed borders or network outages or electricity outages. What will your company do? That may trigger experimentation around those components, and either will force you to build entirely new value chains which work in a new, novel way, and this learning process will allow you to find side business or create a new version of the business, or you will just create an organization that is able to survive shocks, even unexpected ones. Because you can't say what will, for example, remove computing from your value chain, or what will remove GPS from your value chain and for how long. But you can prepare yourself for the situation where your vital component is no longer available. In the past couple of weeks, we actually exercised what will happen if mobility and transport are disabled. But we did it live, not in an anticipative way. On a personal level, the situation is a little bit more interesting, because I have said a couple of times, the most important bit seems to be where you currently are. Right? So it determines who do you know and what can you do for those people and how much the situation wants you. Can you run experimentation on your own? Well, probably not, because the cost of experiments is rather high for a person that is an employee. Unless you get an external investor, most of you probably don't have resources to run multiple experiments which are low cost. Low cost means it's relative. If you are extremely rich, you can spend a little bit more on experimentation than you are tight on cash or other resources. I trust it does make sense. So it's all relative. So what can you do as an individual? First of all, don't close your options. Think about it. If you take debt, mortgage, car lease, or other situation, you didn't have to, but you wanted to make it. You are closing your options because if something unexpected will happen in the future in the market, you will not only be at risk of losing everything you have, but if there are opportunities, you will not be able to exploit them because you have to maintain certain income to pay debt. Actually, this can be generalized. It doesn't have to be about money, because for me personally, when I don't sleep enough, when I have sleep debt, I'm extremely cranky and unpleasant to people. And it also closes options for me because I don't interact with others, and you never know what's the opportunity that has been gone. More on that. Any long-term agreements and obligations, close your options. I will not explore because this is a little bit more personal that I'm willing to share publicly. But there are certain agreements and obligations that if you take, there is no way back. And all of this, okay, so for example, I'm here, I'm born in Poznań, and I have decided to stay in Poznań. Despite all the booms happening in certain spaces, in certain places of the world, I'm not there, I'm here in Poznań because that was my choice. I know today that it has closed many of my options. I still don't know whether this was beneficial for me in the long run, but some options are long gone, and right now I have to figure out how to find new ones. And the third point is expectations. If you want to maintain certain way of living, you are becoming risk averse. And if you are becoming risk averse, you are not experimenting and you will never get a chance to exploit an option. Taleb in his book actually mentions Seneca, who used to start every day from a mental exercise where he pretended to be extremely poor. So every event that happened in the day was kind of unexpected and pleasuring. On the top of that, there is a number of actions that you can make that may improve your situation. And those are options too. For example, workout. Do you take care for your health? The better is your health, the more opportunities you can chase. Because you are not worried, because you are not obsessed with what actually hurts or what isn't right. Reading books, it was mentioned before. Taking care for relatives. It depends on the culture, but in my culture, this is actually something that increases the standard of your life in terms of fulfillment. Joining communities, because if you talk to people, you can learn something new. It doesn't cost a lot. It's limited in terms of effort. But potential benefits cannot be calculated. And finally, and I was very reluctant to put it here, is making friends. Because, it sounds like a cartoon for children, but making friends and building your social network increases your reach and gives you the mass to tackle whatever opportunity will be there. If those friends are from your industry or from other industries, you may be the person that connects the dot and exploits the opportunity when it's there. The opportunity is different for every people. So building those social networks is probably different for each of you. But to emphasize, it's all relative to your wealth. You take a small fraction of your time, of your energy, of your money, of your other resources, and invest in different things. Those things have to have this option characteristics, so they consume only what you give, but can yield potentially very high results, despite they are unpredictable. If you succeed, then it's great. If you don't, then you have done probably everything what you could do. Now, this is a very naive version of options, the very short list of options, and I'm really dying to explore this option further. If you can imagine any option in your personal or corporate life, and you would like to discuss it with me, I have set up a Discord chat. Where you can join me, and we will basically exchange our opinions and experiences. So let's connect. This is my Twitter handle. This is the Discord chat, and I'm pasting it into our chat. If you want to enter the chat, no obligations, and just talk to me, I will be delighted.